It's concise, emotionally charged, and teases both the situation and the slow burn romance, perfect for YouTube shorts or the opening line of your narration that I still remember the way that afternoon looked. The road was quiet, the kind of stretch where the trees on both sides lean in just enough to make you feel like you're driving through a tunnel of sun and shade. I wasn't in a hurry. My old car hummed beneath me, steady and familiar, when up ahead I noticed something that didn't belong, the shimmer of a silver sedan pulled onto the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking faintly in the heat. And then I saw her. She stood there with her arms folded across her chest, her posture calm but her expression betraying the slightest hint of frustration. Her phone was in her hand, though by the way she kept glancing at the car, I guessed she wasn't having much luck with it. The first thing I noticed wasn't her situation, it was her presence. She had that kind of grace that doesn't need to announce itself. Even from a distance, I could sense she carried herself with quiet dignity, like someone who was used to solving her own problems but, in that moment, was caught in a rare pause. I slowed down almost without thinking. Something inside me just wouldn't let me pass by. Maybe it was the way she shifted her weight slightly, as though balancing frustration with patience, or maybe it was the faint tilt of her head when she finally noticed my car approaching. Whatever it was, I pulled over. As I stepped out, the warm air wrapped around me, carrying the faint hum of cicadas and the dry scent of dust rising from the roadside. She lowered her sunglasses to look at me directly. And that's when I really saw her eyes. They weren't just beautiful, they were alive, filled with layers I couldn't quite name. There was strength there, yes, but also something else, a trace of weariness, maybe, or a longing she didn't mean to show. Eyes that told me she'd lived, that she'd carried things heavier than a broken car. Car trouble? I asked, trying to sound casual. My voice came out steadier than I felt. For a moment, she didn't answer. She studied me, just long enough for me to feel the weight of her gaze. Then she gave a small, almost apologetic smile. You could say that. Her voice was warm, low, and carried the kind of calm that makes you want to listen. I offered a hand in the vague direction of the car. Mind if I take a look? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt something subtle, like she wasn't used to depending on anyone. But finally, she nodded. If you think you can help. That simple trust felt heavier than it should have. And as I walked toward her car, aware of her steps just behind me, I realized this wasn't just about fixing an engine. There was something else here, something unspoken, that made the air between us feel different. It was the beginning of a story I hadn't expected to step into that I lifted the hood and leaned forward, squinting into the shadows of the engine. The air smelled faintly of warm metal and gasoline, the kind of scent that clings to a car left standing too long under the sun. I wasn't sure what I would find, but part of me knew that wasn't the point. What mattered was that I had stopped, and that she had let me. She stood a step or two behind me, arms crossed lightly, her phone now tucked away in her bag as if she'd decided to stop trying to call for help. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the ticking of the engine as it cooled and the occasional rustle of wind through the nearby trees. Finally, I broke the silence. Battery might be weak, or maybe just a loose connection. My voice echoed softer than usual, like I was trying not to disturb the strange calm between us. She tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest half-smile. So you're a mechanic? I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Not exactly. But I grew up fixing old cars with my uncle. Sometimes they talk to you, if you know how to listen. Her brow arched just slightly, amused. Cars that talk. That's a new one. I glanced back at her, and for the first time, I saw the teasing glint in her eyes. It was subtle, but it felt like a door opening just a little. She stepped closer, just enough for me to notice the soft fragrance of her perfume, something floral, delicate, and completely out of place on this dusty roadside. She extended her hand, holding out a small wrench from the open toolbox in her trunk. You'll probably need this, she said. I reached for it, and in that instant, our fingers brushed. It wasn't more than a second, but it felt longer. Her hand was warm, steady. My breath caught, not because of the touch itself, but because of the way she didn't pull back too quickly. She let the moment linger, almost as if testing me. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice lower now. She gave a small nod, folding her arms again, though I noticed her posture had softened. She wasn't just waiting anymore, she was watching. And in her gaze, I felt something shift, a quiet trust beginning to form, even if she hadn't meant for it to. As I bent over the engine again, I found myself hyper-aware of her presence. The way her shadow fell lightly across my shoulder. The faint sound of her breathing, steady and calm. The occasional crunch of gravel when she shifted her stance. I tightened a loose connection, the tool clicking softly in my hand. "Try it now," I said, stepping back. She slid gracefully into the driver's seat, her movements composed, elegant. The car coughed but didn't start. She looked at me through the open window, a small sigh escaping her lips. "Guess it's more stubborn than I thought." I gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. I'm stubborn too." For the first time, she laughed, soft, low, but real. And I realized that in helping her fix this broken car, something else was beginning to take shape, something fragile, unexpected, and infinitely more complicated. The sun had dipped just enough to soften the heat, leaving the roadside wrapped in that in-between glow, half daylight, half evening. I leaned over the engine again, my hands working slowly, more careful this time. I didn't want to rush, though truthfully, I wasn't sure if I was stalling to help the car or to keep her there a little longer. She stood only a few feet away, leaning against the side of the car with one shoulder. Her arms weren't folded as tightly now, instead, they rested lightly across her midsection, almost relaxed. Every so often, I could feel her eyes on me, and when I glanced up, she would shift her gaze toward the trees or the road, as if pretending she hadn't been watching at all. The silence stretched between us, not the awkward kind, but the rare kind that feels safe. I wasn't sure why it felt that way, but it did. There was no need to fill it with small talk, no pressure to perform. Just the hum of cicadas, the faint clink of metal in my hand, and the steady rhythm of her quiet breathing. At last, she spoke. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Her voice carried a trace of playfulness, though underneath it I caught a flicker of doubt, like she was both teasing and genuinely hoping I wasn't making things worse. I straightened, wiping my hands on a rag. "Honestly?" I said, giving her a small grin. "About 50% sure. Maybe 60 on a good day." Her laugh slipped out before she could stop it, and I felt it land in my chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. It wasn't loud, it was gentle, unguarded, the kind of laugh that tells you a person has been holding back for too long. "I appreciate the honesty," she said, her lips curving into a smile that softened her whole face. For a while, I kept working, and she just stayed there, her presence steady. I could sense something about her, something unspoken. She carried herself with confidence, yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that underneath that composure, she was tired. Not just tired of the car or the day, but something deeper, the kind of weariness that doesn't come from one afternoon. At one point, as I leaned in closer to the engine, a strand of her hair blew loose in the breeze and brushed across my arm. It was accidental, fleeting, but it made me pause. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, and pretended not to. Either way, the silence after that moment felt charged, heavier somehow. I tightened one last bolt and stepped back. "Almost there," I said quietly. She gave a small nod, her eyes meeting mine for a second longer than before. In that look, without a single word, I understood something simple but undeniable: this silence wasn't empty. It was a bridge, one we were both standing on, unsure of what lay on the other side. And strangely enough, I didn't want to cross it too quickly. The last adjustment clicked into place beneath the hood, and for the first time all afternoon, I felt a quiet surge of confidence. I stepped back, brushing the dust off my palms. "All right," I said, glancing at her with a grin I didn't try to hide. "Try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, her movements smooth, deliberate. The door gave a soft thud as she closed it, and I stood just to the side, waiting. The key turned, the engine stuttered once, then roared back to life. Her reaction was instant. Her head tilted back slightly, and a laugh bubbled out of her, unexpected and unguarded. It wasn't the polite kind of laugh people give out of courtesy. No, this one was real. It lit her face from within, softening the lines of tension I had noticed earlier, and in that moment, she didn't look like a woman weighed down by responsibility or frustration. She just looked free. I couldn't stop myself from smiling. Something about hearing her laugh felt like a reward far greater than fixing a stalled car. She turned off the ignition, then leaned out of the open window, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I can't believe it. You actually did it." I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Told you, I was at least 50% sure." She shook her head, still laughing, and then, almost without thinking, reached out and touched my arm. Just a small gesture of gratitude, light, easy, but the effect was anything but small. Her hand rested there a second too long, warm against the fabric of my sleeve. My breath caught in my throat, and suddenly, the world seemed quieter. The sound of the engine, the hum of the cicadas, even the breeze, it all faded, leaving just that touch and the way her eyes locked onto mine. And it was her eyes that undid me. They weren't just thankful. They weren't just kind. They carried something else, something I didn't dare name yet. A flicker of recognition, maybe, or a question she wasn't ready to ask. Whatever it was, it went deeper than words. I felt it. I knew she felt it too. But just as quickly as it came, she pulled her hand back, folding it neatly in her lap as though reminding herself of some invisible line. The spell broke, but not completely. It lingered, like the aftertaste of something sweet you don't want to let go of. I cleared my throat, trying to gather myself. "Well," I said softly, "guess we got lucky." Her lips curved into a gentler smile now, her voice quieter than before. "Maybe luck had a little help." That silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried a weight, a tension. It felt like standing too close to a flame, not enough to burn, but enough to know it was dangerous. And yet, I didn't want to step away. The car was running now, humming quietly like it hadn't given her trouble at all. But she didn't rush to leave. Instead, she opened the door, stepped out, and leaned back against the hood, letting out a breath as if the weight of the day had finally loosened. "Sit," she said, patting the space beside her. It wasn't a command, but it wasn't exactly a question either. Something in her tone, calm, assured, made it easy to obey. I wiped my hands on the rag, then slid onto the hood beside her. The metal was still warm from the sun, and the faint vibration of the engine beneath us carried through, steady and grounding. For a while, we didn't speak. The world around us seemed suspended, the fading gold of the evening light, the soft rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of the car. It felt like we were cocooned in our own little space, untouched by time. Finally, she broke the silence. "I'm not usually the kind of person who gets stranded like this." I glanced at her, half smiling. "No one ever plans for it." She returned the smile, but there was something behind it. "I mean, I don't like depending on people. It's easier to handle things myself." There was no defensiveness in her voice, just honesty. A quiet confession from someone who wasn't used to letting her guard down. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Doesn't make you weak, you know. Letting someone help." Her gaze flickered toward me, studying me in that intent way she had. Then she laughed softly, almost to herself. "You're too young to talk like that." I chuckled, leaning back on my hands. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just seen enough to know everyone needs someone, sometimes." She was quiet for a moment, then sighed, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun had dipped low. Life has a way of teaching that lesson the hard way. The vulnerability in her tone caught me off guard. She wasn't just talking about cars or roadside trouble. She was talking about something deeper: loss, responsibility, the kind of struggles that leave quiet marks on a person. I didn't press. Instead, I listened, giving her the space she didn't have to fill. A gentle breeze swept past us, carrying with it a strand of her hair. Without thinking, I lifted my hand and brushed it back from her face. My fingertips barely grazed her temple, but the moment stretched longer than it should have. Her eyes met mine instantly, steady, unblinking. "Sorry," I whispered, pulling my hand back too quickly. But she didn't look away. If anything, her lips curved into the faintest, most knowing smile. "You're very careful," she said softly. I didn't know if she meant with her hair, with my words, or with the fragile space between us. Maybe all of it. As the sky deepened into shades of orange and purple, I realized I didn't want the moment to end. Sitting there beside her, sharing nothing and everything in equal measure, felt more intimate than a dozen conversations could have. And in that quiet, I began to understand, this wasn't just chance. This was the beginning of something neither of us had expected, but both of us felt. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying with it the first whispers of night. The road was nearly empty now, save for the occasional hum of a passing car in the distance. Yet neither of us moved. She leaned against the hood, her profile outlined in the fading glow, while I stood a step away, hands loosely in my pockets, unsure whether to hold on to the moment or let it slip. Eventually, she drew in a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with quiet finality. "I should probably get going," she said, though her voice lacked conviction, as if she wasn't entirely ready to leave. I nodded, but the gesture felt heavier than it should have. "Yeah, of course." She turned slightly, facing me now. For a heartbeat, we just stood there, too close to be strangers, too distant to be anything else. The weight of everything unsaid pressed between us. Her eyes softened, lingering on me in a way that felt almost dangerous. There was gratitude there, yes, but beneath it, something deeper, something searching. I could feel it pulling at me, tempting me to cross that invisible line neither of us had dared to name. I handed her the car keys, the cool metal resting against my palm. When her fingers brushed mine to take them, the touch was feather-light, yet electric, like static snapping across skin. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The world seemed to pause around that small contact, as though it understood the significance better than we did. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice lower now, almost tender. "You didn't have to stop." "But you did." I swallowed, my throat dry. Maybe I needed to. The words left me before I could think better of them. Her lips parted slightly, like she might respond, but instead, she just studied me. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, like she wanted to read the truth hidden beneath my calm expression. And in that moment, I wanted to tell her everything, how the silence between us felt safer than words, how her laugh had shaken something loose inside me, how her eyes had been speaking to me since the moment I saw them. But the words stayed locked inside. She stepped back, her hand tightening around the keys. I could see the hesitation in her body language, the way she lingered, the way her feet pointed toward the car but her shoulders angled toward me. It was as if she, too, was torn between leaving and staying. Finally, she gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "Take care of yourself." "You too," I whispered. It should have been simple. A goodbye, nothing more. But the air between us was thick with what we didn't say, with what we weren't ready to admit. It was a goodbye layered with questions neither of us dared to voice. She opened the door and slipped inside, but before closing it, she looked at me once more. And in that look, long, steady, unguarded, was everything her words couldn't carry. Then the door shut softly, and just like that, the fragile spell of the moment cracked. But even as the car hummed to life, I knew something had changed. Because sometimes, the hardest goodbyes are the ones where nothing is truly over. Her car purred softly, alive again, headlights cutting a pale path across the dimming road. I stood a few paces back, arms resting at my sides, trying to look composed while every part of me wanted the moment to last a little longer. She adjusted the mirror, settled her hands on the wheel, but still, she didn't press the accelerator. Instead, she glanced at me through the open window. That look held longer than it needed to, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just politeness. It was something that lingered, something she didn't name and I didn't dare ask about. Finally, with a soft exhale, she eased the car forward. Gravel crunched beneath the tires, the sound oddly final. I watched as the space between us grew, each second stretching like a thread pulling taut. But just before the road curved away, she slowed. The brake lights glowed faint red in the dusk, and the window rolled down halfway. Her face appeared once more, framed by the fading light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes found mine across the distance, steady and searching, as if memorizing me in that fleeting instant. And in them, I saw the same unspoken truth I had felt all along, that something had passed between us today, quiet, fragile, undeniable. Then, with the smallest of nods, she was gone. The sound of her car faded into the distance, swallowed by the hum of the evening. The road grew still again, the silence rushing back to fill the space she had left behind. And yet, it didn't feel empty. I stood there for a long while, the cool air brushing against my skin, the scent of dust and wild grass surrounding me. My hands were still marked with grease from the engine, but beneath the dirt, I felt something else, an imprint that had nothing to do with cars. Her presence lingered like warmth after a fire has burned out, invisible yet undeniable. I thought of the way her laugh had lit up the fading daylight. The way her hand had rested on my arm just a moment longer than it needed to. The way her silence had carried more weight than words ever could. And most of all, I thought of her eyes, the ones that had said everything she never voiced aloud. It would have been easy to call it nothing more than chance. A roadside favor. A stranger's gratitude. That's what anyone else would see. But I knew better. Because sometimes, the moments that change us the most aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet. They slip in unnoticed, in the brush of a hand, in the glance that lingers, in the silence that feels too meaningful to ignore. As I turned back to my own car, I realized that she hadn't just driven away. Not really. A part of her stayed with me, carried in the memory of her eyes, eyes that had spoken more than words ever could. And I knew, without fully understanding how, that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something neither of us had expected.